Christopher Check said, no one will understand this conversation.
Exactly. The Aussie and the Cockney together. God help us all, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The Cockney's closer to the Aussie, isn't it?
Well, actually, if I had $1 for every time someone asked me if I was Australian, I would actually be a rich man.
I'd have $15. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to American ears, the London accent, the Cockney accent sounds similar to the Australian accent. And I can see phonetically...
Because it's sort of like a rough blue collar... It sounds like when they want a blue-collar person to play in a BBC series, it's the Cockney accent,
it's the Cockney,
right?
yeah. Or even worse, it's the accent that the orcs use in Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know. Do I sound Australian anymore? I don't know.
You sound Australian. Thanks be to God. I love your accent.
When I go back, I sound very Australian. You give me 2 hours of
you
Aussie,
pick it up?
Or if I have a few beers, yeah.
Yeah, really.
What about you?
Well, my theory is that if you can't mimic, and I can't, you just keep your accent. So if you asked me to do an American accent, I couldn't do it. So I've been here for 23 years, and I haven't lost my English accent because I can't do other accents. If I could, I'd lose it. So I'm guessing you can, because if you pick your Aussie back up straight away, I'm guessing you can mimic other accents fairly easily.
Oh, I see. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's my theory, because I can't. I don't have that gift, I don't have that ability, and so that's why I've still got the same accent. I mean, it's not exactly the same. Probably sounds a little bit weird when I go back to England, because I came here to teach, and if I need to be understood. So I spoke more slowly than I would do normally. I made a point of trying to pronounce my T's and my H's, because Cockneys don't, you say house, not house, water, not water.
Yeah.
So, I try to smooth off the rough edges, not because I was ashamed of my accent, because I need to be understood. If you're teaching, you're trying to communicate, right? So I'm a writer, you're writing, it doesn't matter, but when you're actually speaking, it's important. So I've got a softer accent than I had when I arrived.
Now, you're a literary man. You've published books on lofty kind of topics. Were you ever tempted to change the accent to make it a bit more refined because of your pride and arrogance, or no?
Emphatically not. And with my background, two prison sentences, I think it'd be rather preposterous to try to pretend to be somebody I'm not. So,
but it is something people, including myself, especially in the past. I remember I started Pints with a Quietness, and I remember just that fear, like, I actually don't know what the hell I'm talking about. The deeper I get into this, I'm not a Thomist. I have a master's in philosophy. I know a few things. I'm not an idiot, but I'm not brilliant. And I think in the beginning it was tough for me, but then I got to a point where it was just so much easier to be honest.
Yeah, and I also think that first of all that if you're willing to read and willing to learn, you don't have to have jumped through all the academic hoops to know what you're talking about. In actual fact, there's a certain type of academic. And I always say there are two things necessary for teaching: to know what you're talking about and to be able to communicate what you know. And there's lots of academics out there that know what they're talking about, but they can't communicate it. And if you can't communicate it, you might be able to write a book, but you can't teach.
Tim Staples said that when he was hiring me at Catholic Answers. He said, because I had not one day in university when I was hired by them. And I think they were like, okay, we need to fix this. Maybe just for appearances, I don't know. But he said we'd much rather have someone who can communicate now and learn, as opposed to someone who's very learned but can't communicate. Exactly.
That's spot on. I would pursue that as well.
Jimmy Akin's like this. So Jimmy, he shared openly that in order to be taken more seriously, he kind of dropped the Southern accent a little bit and even changed his name to James Akin. And then he realized really quickly, none of that matters.
Yeah. Yeah, in actual fact, but to be honest with you, my favorite American accent is the Southern accent.
I love it.
It reminds me of the rural, rustic English accent. But the countryside accents, they're not rushed. And they're not melting pot ugly, where you got all the different inputs of different slang from different cultures. There's this sort of sing-song purity about it, which I love. So I love the Southern accent. I mean, if people try to lose it, I don't really understand why,
I like it. That's funny. I wonder if that's a foreign thing, because it has a bit of a stigma in America, unfortunately. And I always get quite offended on their behalf when they try to make the Southerners seem like the dunce, when we all know it's the kind of... Yeah, it's the aristocratic people on the edges of the country.
And it's ironic, of course, because it's like the same thing in England, the Cockney accent. Over here, people think my accent's cute and quaint. Over there, they think you're a Cockney from the East End of London, right? It doesn't. England is very sort of hierarchical in its class consciousness. So it's, over there, my accent's a handicap. Over here, people like it.
Yeah. No, the Southern accent is my favorite. My friend John Henry says he loves it when people sound like they're from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. You don't want generic American, whatever that is.
I was disappointed a little bit when I was in Europe for the last 6 months, because every big city I went to, all over Europe. I mean, I traveled every weekend to a different country to preach. I realized that I can get away with English in the big cities.
Yeah.
And that was helpful, but it was disappointing.
I know.
And it made me wonder, in 50 years from now, maybe when my grandkids are going to Europe, will they even need to bother learning German or Italian, even in the smaller places? And then the thing I'm driving at, thing I want to get you to talk about is, how tied up people's culture is with their dress, with their speech, with their songs. And now it feels like, just like England once kind of colonialized a lot of the world, now America is doing that through their lack of culture, perhaps. So that everyone dressed like Americans, we listen to the American music, we speak English.
Yeah, I think that it is the danger of globalization, globalism. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that the individual nations of Europe are like beautiful flowers in the gardens of God. And we're replacing that beautiful garden, all those beautiful different flowers, are all unique and have their own beauty, with a monoculture, a single wheat field, speaking the same language badly, wearing the same clothes, listening to the same music, mostly bad. So we've replaced this authentic multiculturalism, right, of all these different nations and cultures with a dumbed down, lowest common denominator monoculture, globalism. And really, I'm in favor of people resisting that. And that must include, by the way, the preservation of local languages. Yeah. For instance, in my home now, the United Kingdom, I love the efforts to keep the Welsh language alive and the Scots Gaelic and the Irish Gaelic languages alive, because it's very important for the authenticity of that nation as a unique entity, rather than something which just could be subsumed within Great Britain and then the world.
Yeah, I wonder, all these things that I just mentioned, right? So like a country's literature, including their poetry, their dress, their language. How much of all of that is sort of like a seamless thread or seamless garment? Like, once you attack one of them, do the rest fall? Or is it possible to maintain one's language while giving up one's dress and, entertainment and things like that? Or is it kind of, once you adopt one of these things, the rest will fall?
I think there's an integrity and an entirety and a holism about the whole. So when you start tampering with it, you're weakening not just that part, but the whole. Yeah. So you do have to try to preserve all that which is authentic. I mean, Tolkien, the whole idea of the Shire, right? The local culture being very intent on preserving itself against encroachments from outside. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have. I believe in the great books. I thank God I can't speak Italian. I wish I could, but I thank God people translated Dante into English. So I don't believe in isolationism from Christendom and the wider culture of civilization. But I do think that we don't want a monoculture, because none of these things would be able to exist. We'd all be speaking the same mundane, lowbrow, badly articulated nonsense. I'd rather have to either learn other languages to access this literature, or thank God for good translators that make those things accessible to me, rather than forgetting all those different languages and just being mundane and lowbrow.
It seems to me, though, that you can have pockets of people resisting all you want. I used to live in the Gaeltacht in Ireland, where they're keeping the Irish language alive. I used to live by Quebec, where, they're kind of violently defending their language, and good for them. But it seems to me like there's no hope. This is a tsunami, and it's just going to happen. There's no way. There's no way like in England, what I found interesting, or Ireland, is you drive an hour and you've got different accents.
Yes.
So that says to me that when people live long enough in an area, those things will evolve. In Australia, you don't see that as much, right? Because we haven't been there as long. In Africa, I remember being in Uganda, and my fellow friend and evangelist Dennis was driving me around. He's saying he can tell where women and men are from based on their physiognomy.
Wow.
So I would like to believe that we can kind of resist, we can maintain our cultures. I think with the internet and with the speed of entertainment, it just won't happen.
I think that yes and no. I mean, certainly you can't resist things that are much too powerful to resist. But that we're living in an accelerated time. Acceleration is unstable. So either things have to slow down or they crash. So what will emerge from that will be something which is healthier than globalism. It won't be the same pure thing that hasn't experienced globalism, right? Now, whole of history. So I'll give you an example. I have a nostalgia for Anglo-Saxon England, right? The pure England before those darn Normans conquered the country almost 1,000 years ago. But the Norman conquest happened, and it made it, indelible changes to English culture, the infusion of the French language into English for starters. And I might wish in a pure world that the Norman conquest never happened, but it did. So the key thing is that we have to preserve that which is good, true, and beautiful from where we are, not where we want to be or where we should be, but from where we are. And the key thing about Christianity is whatever the culture, we can evangelize it. And insofar as we evangelize in accordance with the truth, goodness, and beauty of Christ, we are going to be making something good, true, and beautiful. And it will be something impacted by the culture that surrounds it, but it will still be good, true, and beautiful. That's the purity of Christ. The unchanging aspect of culture is insofar as it's Christocentric, it's going to be good, true, and beautiful.
Something just occurred to me, and that's that what we're talking about with this globalization and people losing their languages and how this is a bad thing. But it seems like in the church, the opposite has happened. For a long time in the Western church, we've had one language, different liturgies, but they look quite similar. If you look at the Dominican or the Carmelite rite to the Tridentine rite, which sort of synthesized them somewhat. I think a lot of Catholics would say it's kind of unfortunate, that you go to a church in Africa or Germany and now there's different languages. Do you see what I mean? It's like we're saying the opposite is the case. Or do you not agree with that? Do you think it's good that people can...
Well, I think the difference between Caesar and Christ is absolutely essential. The Catholic Church is the mystical body of Jesus Christ. It should have one language that speaks to all Christians across the world. It should have an official language. And that's not to say that we can't have diversity in other respects, but we have to have that one language. And it's ironic, at exactly the time when people are traveling globally more than ever, right? You used to go to the Mass in Italy or France or Africa or anywhere in the world, and it would be the same Mass. You'd feel exactly at home. You'd be part of the same mystical body, and you wouldn't have to try to work out what's going on because it would be clear. And exactly the time when everyone's traveling all over the world, we dissolve that unity and end up with this fragmentation. So I think we do have to see the difference between Christ and Caesar, that we don't want Caesar to have world dominion. Right, we don't want globalism because that's the global power, the global dominion of Caesar. But we do want Christ to have dominion.
Wow, that came full circle in a beautiful way. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.